We have a fascinating question today from Madison. She writes that she's a young 22-year-old who's been dating her boyfriend for a couple of years now. They started a romance-filled relationship, and they only very gradually let intimacy into the relationship, such that Madison lost her virginity to her boyfriend a whole 6 months into their courtship. Over time, and very slowly, they introduced BDSM into the relationship, and eventually, BDSM sex was the only kind of intimacy they would indulge in the bedroom. Her boyfriend was the dominant and she was the submissive. The sex was great, but things seemed imbalanced, and both Madison and her boyfriend wanted to go back to, quote, regular sex where we were just on equal levels. Now, while both Madison and her boyfriend agreed to this, every time the clothes came off, they slipped right back into the dominant-submissive dynamic. And she goes on to ask how other couples are able to balance their romantic and kinky sides in their relationship.
When I read this question, I think I was fascinated to consider something I've thought about in other ways. What does it mean to want something? Because she writes, well, I want to have romantic sex. And presumably that means something. There's a picture in her head about what romantic sex would look like, or what it, like there's a presumption of what that must be. Romantic sex can't be rough, maybe. It can't be choking or dominant or roles or something like that. And yet, the fact that they haven't done it makes me wonder if that wanting is coming from an authentic place, or if it's something that she thinks she should want, but doesn't actually, or they think they should want. So that notion of wanting is the first one that came up. The second one is the definition of romance, which I already alluded to. Why does that image, there's a more, I don't know, a particular image of what romantic sex looks like, but and I'll be curious about your view actually on this, because I think for me, having been kinky from such a young age and been in love and had very loving relationships, kink and power dynamics have essentially always been a part of my sexuality. And thus, the most loving, most romantic, most affectionate times of deep connection that I've had were within the context of a power dynamic. She was still saying, yes, sir. She was still doing as I told her. She was still, it may not have been the most rough, though often it was that too, to be honest. I think for me, it's been integrated for so long that I'm like, well, romantic is a perspective. It's not an action. And you can have that perspective with any particular set of actions.
Oh, it's actually really fascinating that you're not seeing or seeing in this question what I'm seeing. It's so fascinating.
That's always interesting.
Yeah, I took it a very different way. I think that the key to the question is actually in the very last line. She says, how are other couples able to, quote, balance their romantic and kinky sides? Inherent in that is this idea that if you're just doing kinky all the time, then you're imbalanced. There's an imbalance going on, and that somehow the universe needs to swing the scale back to the other side, where you can have more, quote unquote, normal sex. Like, she's kind of basically saying that, listen, I've gotten a little bit freaky, and I'm just wondering, how can I be a little bit less freaky? How can I be more normal? Is kind of the heart of what she's getting at. How can I live a less extreme life? Let me just rephrase it that way. And if you rephrase it that way, the first question you would then ask is, well, why do you think BDSM is an extreme thing? Like, why do you feel a need to balance something that is working just fine? So this notion, and I think you say, well, she has some idea of what romantic means. I think it's the trope of slow, methodical love. Like, I love you so much, and you're just slowly making love to somebody.
Your hair is like an ocean. Your eyes are like the stars.
Exactly.
I'm just
So
kidding.
it's that kind of love that I think she was, or having sex she was referring to. I mean, we have to keep in mind, and I think this is important, this is a very relatively inexperienced young lady, right? She was a virgin. This is her first boyfriend. And so her own conceptions of what, quote, normal sex is like is probably just informed by nothing at all, really. Just no experience informs it, just whatever her views
Cultural,
on cultural
absorption.
expectation. Yeah. And so my challenge to her is, explain to me why, when something is working, you think there's an abnormality or an imbalance that needs to be evened out. And I think if you push that, right, what emerges is this almost unspoken statement that there's something abnormal about kinky BDSM sex, which means that you haven't yet understood why it is you guys keep doing it every time. You want to have the quote unquote normal sex. You're trying, but every time the clothes come off, you just slip right back into BDSM. I mean, is that not a signal of something? Should you not meditate on why that's happening? So those are my general thoughts on this one.
No, I think there's something to lean into there. Something I talk about in the book. Once again, putting in the plug since we're recently published, Love is a Kink, available on Amazon.
Highly recommended.
Thank you, sir. I mean, one of the things I talk about in the book actually is that so much of the self-help and especially sexual self-help literature, the book Come As You Are by Nagoski, which I think is complete horseshit, literally self-contradicts itself one page to the next based on studies that were extremely poorly done methodologically, whatever. I really want to do like a teardown of that book because I think it does a bunch of harm, and this is a great example of the case, right? One of the points I make in my book is maybe you're not normal. Probably you're not normal. Like in some way, like is it height or size or preference or kink or some combination of those? Is there someone of exactly your skin color, height, hair color, gender, with your sexual kinks who has genitals that look like yours? No, you're probably abnormal. Like if you take the combination of things, you are abnormal. Because normal is the average. That's the definition of normal on a bell curve. So if you just say, hey, yeah, I'm probably abnormal, normal and unique are opposites. Those are fundamentally incompatible. So romance is based on my inner uniqueness, and thus anything that would be romantic is almost fundamentally acknowledging my abnormality. I'm a smart guy. Cool. I want a girl who appreciates my intelligence. Well, she's appreciating my abnormality. My intelligence is abnormal. And so the notion of rather than trying to justify your normalcy, I think in an intimate setting, which is important for the persona. I don't walk around, ideally, you get on my case about this, but ideally I don't walk around bludgeoning people with my intelligence. I try not to, at least. I try to communicate in ways that are effective rather than trying to communicate the way I do to you. With you, I speak at a higher level because we're comfortable with that mutuality. I don't in public because the persona, I need to be more normal. This conversation's abnormal. But in an intimate relationship, whether that's friendship or romantic, we engage our abnormalities and we want to be appreciated for those abnormalities. And so justifying normalcy is a strange intention for a sexual relationship. The question is not, is this normal? The question is this satisfying to us mutually, personally, individually, irrespective of what's normal? And so letting go of that push to normalcy, I think, is hard for young women in particular because the persona is very strong, the integration socially is very strong, and there's a bit of a challenge for her there.
The other thing I would add is one of the things maybe you're not picking up is this subliminal suggestion that there's something wrong, almost morally wrong. Like the way someone would go and indulge in a heavy meal, they get pizza, they know it's not good for them, right? But you indulge every now and then, right? In a similar way, this BDSM thing, it's weird, it's these weird people do that. Okay, so we won't do it all the time, we'll just do it sometimes. That's fine, right? And I think that what she was kind of getting at is, how can I have less of this sinful flavor of sex, right? And I think that's the subliminal context. And again, the only reason I say that is because young 22-year-old virgin into this relationship. So I'm assuming she was perhaps from a more conservative or herself is perhaps a bit more conservative leaning. Not that 22 is like that old to like lose your virginity, but but they also waited 6 months to have sex, right? So that's another signal to me that she's probably from a conservative background, and those kind of leanings, without even her thinking about it, make her think about kinky sex as some kind of a sinful thing that wise people might not indulge in all the time. I think she was looking for how do I become more temperate, I suppose is another way of putting it, right? To use a biblical term. How do I become more temperate in my sexual appetites, I suppose? I'm rephrasing it quite a bit, but
no, I think that's a useful rephrasing. It's got me thinking for sure, this notion of a moralistic aspect to the perception there, and the unclarity of where that lies and the conflict perhaps with our impulses. I think if you've grown up with temperance or the desire for upright moral behavior on some level, you start to emotionally recognize moments of gluttony as moments of lack of discipline. Or
yes,
you start to associate indulgence with, or even pleasure itself perhaps, with immorality on some level, since public morality so often hinges on temperance, modesty, and limitation of your impulses. So see the connection I think you're making. It's challenging to realize that this is the exception to the rule, perhaps. And who's to say that it's fully exceptional? I don't know. Like, certainly there are limits to what is moral, even sexually, in the sense of if you've made a promise for monogamy, if you've made a promise for respecting your partner's limits, there are these bounds to our sexual engagements nonetheless. But within those bounds, the freedom to indulge is one of the unique aspects of intimacy in general. Yes, we typically in public should limit our emotional expressions. If we're sad, we shouldn't wander around crying all that. That's not appropriate in a job setting. But at home, we expect our sadness and our true, authentic emotion to be received and to be allowable, to be able to indulge that full expression of our inner self and to have that received safely. And even then, there are limits. And so I think perceiving the intimate space as a bit, this is an Ayn Rand quote, actually, is that love is exception making. And there's an interesting notion there that I've always loved, that, no pun intended, that love is the space where exceptions are made for rules. Love creates its own container, creates its own boundary, creates its own frame. So you're not just freely doing whatever the fuck you want with no respect for the other person, but it does create a bit of an exception to a lot of these moral rules, maybe.